Hi, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of the PCDN Social Change Career Podcast. This is season 11, session 2, and we're here today with Dan Perez, who is the director for SRI North America, and we're going to be talking about talent is universal. Talent. Hold on, I'm just getting my right notes. Sorry, I just lost my notes. Okay, here they are. Okay, we're going to be talking about unlocking potential, executive recruiting, and international development and social impact. Apologies for the confusion. I had too many notes there. As we're getting started, if you haven't joined us before, just making sure it's working. Okay. If you haven't joined us before, this is a live stream and it's part of the Social Change Career Podcast. To date, we have about 110 episodes with innovators and change makers and troublemakers from around the world. During the live stream, we'd love to know where you're watching from. So please feel free to share your country or city of location and a little bit about yourself. And also, we really enjoy bringing questions from the audience. So please, whether it's in the first few minutes or at the end, feel free to share your questions and comments to make this as engaging as possible. And then about a week later, next Friday, this should be converted to a podcast episode. So you can subscribe to the Social Change Career Podcast and listen to this. Our first episode for season 11 was with Dr. Fatali Moghadam, who's one of the world's top social psychologists at Georgetown. So his episode is now live today, and I'll share that later. And the one request we have as we're going through this, at the end, if you like the podcast, and please consider rating and sharing it to help us grow our reach, because we have an amazing season ahead of us. Check out PCDN Global and check out SRI. So I will summarize Dan's bio and then we'll jump right into it. And I see lots of people joining us from all over the world. So I will start welcoming you. Dan is the director for North America with SRI Executive, the global executive search, strategy, and leadership consulting firm. SRI Executive works with clients across international development, global health, development, sustainability on their crucial leadership challenges. Before he was at SRI, Dan worked with Egon Zehnder, a global executive search firm, and Booz Allen, a global management consultancy. He's on the board of directors of Atlas Corps. We had the CEO of Atlas Corps on the podcast last season, Bijan Nishat, a social enterprise that develops social change leaders. He's also the author of Wonk University, a great title, the first guidebook on graduate admissions for international relations and public policy programs. He holds an MPA from Columbia's School of International and Public Affairs and a BA from Tufts University, and he currently lives in Washington, D.C. Again, I'm Craig Zalzer from PCDN, based in Medellin, Colombia. And before we get started, just going to welcome, we have an amazing global audience. So Shodan, hi, Jana from Kuwait, Jessica from Zambia, Mohammed from Pakistan. I'm probably missing some people. Kwan Ali from Rwanda, Ayesha from Pakistan, Love from Ghana, Nadia from Sofia, Fatima from Oman. I don't think we've had anyone from Oman before. Ola from Maryland, Amelda from Kenya, Eden from Austria. Actually, it goes on a lot. Francis from Maryland, Kay from Houston. I'm working on social impact, and many other people. So as we're going throughout this, great to see so many people. Welcome, Juliet. So please let us know where you're watching from. Marcus from Canada. Marcus is a good friend doing a lot of work on social impact and working with in South Sudan. And Felton from Liberia. So thank you everyone for joining us. And just to start off with, Dan, can you summarize a little bit about what has been the focus of your career overall? And is there like a central social impact theme running through it?
Sure. First off, Craig, thank you so much for having me on, and thank you so much for the PCDN audience, and very nice to meet you all, and very grateful to be part of this conversation. My early career was in management consulting, focused in the public policy space. I graduated from Tufts and was focusing on history and political science. Was able to then graduate degree in public policy from Columbia, and then joined Booz Allen Hamilton. And I was working on a lot of policy and strategy changes for the US government and for other related organizations. But in terms of executive recruiting, I was a bit of a career changer when it came to moving into executive recruiting. I, was doing great in my career in management consulting, but I really wasn't happy. I wasn't fulfilled. it wasn't really matching my values and where I saw my career. And so I went through a very deliberate search process of my own, looked at different options, and got connected actually with executive recruiting. And the more and more I learned about it, the more I realized that this is a fantastic fit for me personally in terms of where I saw my career going. Partly because while I was doing management consulting, I had started to build up this whole side career in professional development. I had been volunteering with a great organization here in Washington, D.C. called Young Professionals in Foreign Policy. I had been doing a lot of advising for individuals coming out of Tufts and coming out of Columbia for how they could think about their career and their decision to go into graduate school. And that culminated in me writing the book Wonk University. And I had had this whole passion for professional development. And then that led into my work at Booz Allen, where I started actually doing recruiting at Booz Allen internally for how people moved into different projects. And then I started representing Booz Allen at career fairs. And so then when I, in a way, stumbled onto executive search as a career, but putting all those things together, realized it was a fantastic fit for me. And so I've been doing executive search for 8 years now, first with Egon Zehnder and now SRI Executive. And it's a fantastic way because we deal with the largest leadership, hiring, recruiting challenges for these global organizations. As you mentioned, we work with organizations across a number of different international development and social impact issues. And all of them face challenges around hiring, around retention, around development of their leaders. And so SRI Executive, we're a global firm where we're based in 20 countries. We work with organizations around the world, and we help these organizations with these challenges. And so it's very gratifying work to be helping such great organizations, working with top leaders, working with organizations that are trying to improve how they can, make the world better.
Wonderful, and welcome so many people from around the world: Nigeria, India, Paris, UK, Geneva. So again, please start asking your questions. We'll bring them in as much as possible. So one question, you did both a bachelor's and a master's at very top tier universities. And can you talk a little bit, did that academic training prepare you for the work at Booz Allen and beyond? And what skills did you find useful in your career? And as you transition more to search, did you have to develop a new set of skills you just learned by doing? And what are some skills you think are critical, regardless of the sector someone is in social impact?
Mm-hmm. No, it's a great question. And I would say, when I work with a lot of leaders, there's this tension for everybody in their career, which is that they're the things that they're good at and the things that they know and the things that they're passionate about. And then there are the areas that they want to learn and they want to grow. And so there's always, our careers are always in that tension between what we know and what we're good at and where we want to go. And so, I started doing history and political science as a foundation at Tufts. And what that taught me was a lot around taking in information very quickly, looking at trends, doing analysis. And that was a very good foundation for going into management consulting, because that really helps you ask the right questions for your clients, understand the right information that you need to gather to help them with finding their solutions, and then presenting it and communicating it in the proper format. But then I always looked to expand my career and find those areas that I wanted to grow in. So when I went to Columbia, my big focus was actually moving from that qualitative side of the research and the analysis to the quantitative side. And I picked Columbia because it was a very quantitative program. I did a lot in economics, in data analysis, in budgeting, in accounting, because those are all very critical skills as you think about leadership and management for institutions anywhere. And so that's really how I looked at balancing my education there.
And before we dive even more into skills and recruitment, If someone's listening to this or watching now or in the future, and they're thinking about grad school, since you wrote a great book on this, and we'll share the link in the show notes. What is your advice? There's two things here. So one, time has changed, and credentials are still very important, but employers are starting to put a little more emphasis on skills, not to say over credentials, but credentials is not enough. So one is just advice for anyone thinking about grad school in general. Is it worth the time or investment? There's lots of funding opportunities. We'll talk about those, and people might look at PCDN and ProFellow are two great resources for funding. But how does someone think about, is it worth it in general? And then if they're going to be doing something in public policy, public affairs, or the fields you have expertise in, any advice for if they've said, yes, I want to do grad school, how to go about narrowing down the programs, and any advice for funding, professors, and that stuff?
Sure. So, the first question is just around, is the graduate degree worthwhile? It's a very important question, and it's really dependent on a number of different factors. One is, where you are in your career and where you want to grow. And if you're looking to expand yourself internationally, if you're looking to move into different sectors, or like I did, which was wanting to gain a lot of skills in, a lot of quantitative skills, then a graduate degree can be very worthwhile. There's a ton of fantastic programs out there that have great instruction in a number of different areas. The funding question, as you mentioned, is key. And everybody really needs to understand their own personal financial situation. They are in very difficult investments. I was had to take out a number of loans to afford the program, spent a long time paying it off. But I found that it was incredibly worthwhile for me because the skills I learned, the community that I was a part of there was fantastic. And I think, though, in the time since I've been in graduate school, there's been a ton that has changed in the space. And there are so many different learning options for individuals, in a way to, as a step before considering a graduate program, which is, 2+ years of your life. It's tens of thousands, if not more, dollars. Look into the resources that are available. A lot of these programs and courses are now available online. You can look at different resources to make sure that it's the right fit for you and it's the right investment. And then in terms of how to get the best out of it. So I actually, in terms of my book, I used to actually sell it on Amazon, but I took it down recently because I realized the content was very out of date. I had last published it in 2015. But for your listeners, if anyone wants to reach out to me via LinkedIn, I'm happy to share a free copy with them, so they can take a look at it. And the book goes through all the different steps for you to think about. I go through the programs in detail about their academic credentials. I do focus in the book on these full-time kind of multi-year programs. And so the well-known programs, the Harvard Kennedy School, Columbia SIPA, Johns Hopkins SAIS. But I think the lessons there will be very worthwhile for people as they're thinking about graduate school writ large. So happy to share that with your audience and others.
Wonderful. Any plans to do a newer version, or it's kind of germinating?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I wanted to go ahead and update the data that I had in there, in terms of the admissions credentials, what schools are looking for. But also I know that things have changed since I last wrote it. And so I want to incorporate some new content to make it as useful for people considering these programs as possible, because things change very rapidly.
So I just put this comment here. So I did junior abroad in 1990 in Hungary. So about maybe 8 months after the collapse of the Berlin Wall. Changed my life, so literally I wound up spending a year. And then I had a mentor who ran international programs. She kept bugging me saying, apply for a Fulbright. And in my mind, I'm like, that's only for important people. And luckily I listened to her. And I got a Fulbright, and I was able to go back to Hungary for 2 more years. And I was supposed to be doing academic research. I started an NGO. Then I did my master's at Central European University, got a fellowship. So actually, Central European University, supported by George Soros and Open Society, has a lot of funding. It's globally, expert, and then, globally renowned, a lot of awards, and it takes students from all over the world. For my PhD, I got funding lots of places. I went to a place that gave me no funding, but then I got funding for my field research. But I think, it's possible to do grad school. These are some great funding: Fulbright, Chevening, Schwartzman, Knight Hennessy, the German, the DAD. There's so many fellowships out there, more for PhD than masters, but there are opportunities. So I was able to do my master's program debt-free. PhD, I took a little debt. Bachelor's my parents paid for. And that really thinking about the cost. And then, Profile is a great resource in PCDN. So, and thank you for being open to sharing a copy of the book in PDF. So people are already commenting. So I'm sure it'll be really useful. So my last question for now, and then I'm going to get into questions coming from the audience. So can you just demystify 2 things? So what does it actually mean to work in recruitment? Because a lot of people don't realize talent management and talent recruitment are so critical in advancing social impact missions and organizations, whatever type of organization, for-profit, nonprofit, foundation, multilateral. And there was an interesting report from RippleWorks, which I encourage people to check out. We're going to have someone from RippleWorks, Megan Paul, in about 2 weeks. It's one of the world's coolest social enterprises. They did a report, I think 2016, that I've used a lot, where they looked at social enterprise organizations, more companies, and what was the biggest challenge to growth. And everyone thinks it's funding, and that's part of it. But one of the things they said, it's talent, and then they went talent in certain areas like that. So what does it mean to build a career? And 2, just to demystify. So how many years experience does someone need to have? How do you work with the clients, both the organizations you're helping and the individuals, and kind of your recommendations for people when they hear a job is being sourced through a recruitment company?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, there's a lot of questions there. Let me tackle. So the first off, the value. How do we as a search firm, partner with these organizations? We partner with them in a couple of different ways. One is that talent is finding the right talent is an incredibly challenging and time-consuming process. And for organizations that are growing very rapidly, that have a lot of needs to bring on great people, they need help from organizations like ours, because they realize that they don't, they look for our help with the network, for broadening out their reach to find great talent, for helping them with best practices, to find the best candidates, to interview the best candidates, to go through the whole negotiation process. So we help them with that. We also help them with diversity, because a lot of times, organizations that are based in a particular geography, they may not have the networks or the connections to talent in different geographies. And we're based in 20 countries. Our clients are global, but we really, we as a team connect very regularly to say, who are the great leaders that we're seeing in these different geographies, who's open to relocating, who's open to being considered for these different opportunities. And so we help our candidates with broadening out the pool of potential people to consider for these roles. And we also help them with, process and risk reduction. These searches are especially at the executive level, are very involved. Can be very political if you're thinking about different organizations that have different considerations to keep in mind. And so we help them with managing a good process, making sure that candidates feel very involved and well connected to during the whole search process. We make sure that information is communicated both between the organization and the candidates, and then we make sure is that as an organization is deciding on a final candidate, we help them with reference checking, we help them with salary negotiation, we help them with contract development. All of those are critical steps in a process, and we like to say is that the search is actually early onboarding for a for the candidate that eventually comes into the role. If they're not familiar with the organization, this might be their first time interacting with them. So you want to make sure that if the candidate is going to take this role, that they have such a good process getting to know the organization, interviewing with them, meeting people as they go through the process, and then finally coming on board. And so we help our clients at all steps of the way. To your other question about how to partner effectively with an executive search firm like mine. So one is, of course, just reach out, let us know that you're looking. We always look to hear from great candidates and keep them in mind. One thing is we are a client-based firm. So, people may reach out, but a lot of times we'll have to say, well, we don't have a search open now that is the right fit for you, but you never know when a client will come up and say, hey, we need somebody with this background, and that may be the right fit for you. And in fact, I had coffee yesterday with a candidate that I placed into a role, and we had talked for many roles. She and I had talked about one role, and then it wasn't the fit for her, and then had her put forward for another role, and then was able to place her into a fantastic role. And so it's just about keeping in touch, building that relationship. And one thing I will also, want to mention to your audience, because I get this all the time, and I always talk to candidates, is they reach out to me and they say, oh, I'm interested in an executive role. And I say, great, what type? And they're like, oh, well, I can do anything. I'm like, no, not at the executive level. I think people think that if they if they narrow themselves down, that they're cutting off potential opportunities. And I say, no, I want to know what you're really passionate about, what you're really focused on, because our clients come to us with very specific needs, and they have a very specific type of person that they're looking for. And so I want to know, what type of leader you are, what areas you want to grow in, what's part of your prior experience. Be specific, really understand where you are in your career and where you want to go. And don't worry about about closing off opportunities, because actually what you're doing by being very specific is you're finding the right opportunity that's the fit for you. And that's the most important thing.
Thank you so much. I have a million more questions, but let's go to some from people watching. Marcus. Hi, Dan. Thanks for engaging. He used to work as a director of an agency conducting recruiting and sourcing for humanitarian work for the UN, which is different than his normal role. When you recruit, to what extent are you able to be forthcoming about the challenges in an organization, since often, not all organizations are healthy. All organizations have challenges, but, how do you deal with that aspect of, are you transparent about what's going on in the organization? And, do you talk to clients about, overall, are you selective in the clients you take? And then when you're working with candidates, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And it really gets back to my point about how this recruiting is almost early onboarding. And so we always urge our clients to be as open as possible with what's going on with this role, what's going on with the organization, what are the challenges that you're facing, and then let us really understand that and be as open as we can with candidates. And because we think about it that if an organization is going through a particular challenge, you want to find the right candidate that's a fit for that challenge, and more importantly, is excited by that challenge. So if they're having financial issues and say they need a very good fundraiser, you want to have that person that is excited by that opportunity. Because you don't want that person to come in and then be faced with a challenge that they weren't expecting, that they weren't prepared for, because then you get a mismatch. And then when it comes to the question of toxic cultures, toxic work environments, I always encourage my candidates as they move through the search process to start to reach out to their networks, start to understand, get a different perspective on these organizations, hear what's going on, see what their reputation is. Because there always might be things that the client will share with us, but it may be a different perspective for how the larger community views that organization or views that challenge that they're having. But
Yes.
The more information, the more transparency, the better.
So a follow-up question, I think connected to Marcus's, is I used to consult, I won't say for which company, but I did a bunch of consulting for a company and a contractor for a government agency. And so and the consulting was fine. Like I liked the work, but I just felt like the company was kind of disorganized. And there's a lot of problems with contractors, which is different than full-time hires. And at one point, two things happened. One point, they were going to rebid for a contract, and I was consulting with another friend, and we both just said no. Like we didn't want to be part of it again. It was just too awkward. But the second thing is, at one point, I did apply for a full-time job with them, and I got an interview. I don't know if I would have moved ahead, but I started talking to my network, and people were like, you do not want to work with them full-time. Like consulting, I was fine. So I just, nicely withdrew, said, I don't remember what I said. So kind of related to that, what is your advice in general for candidates at any stage of their career about, organizations are interviewing them, but what are the things that candidates can do to vet the organization, both the role and the organization?
Absolutely. No, it's a fantastic point. And so two things I encourage candidates to do, and one is just take some time to ask good questions from the organization, and we make sure our clients build that into their interview process, that we leave a big chunk of time to say, hey, you're interviewing the candidate, but now the candidate needs to take some time to ask you questions because they need to hear what's going on in the organization. They want there are things that they need to know. And then I also encourage my candidates when they're talking to an organization is find 2 or 3 people that recently left there. And I think this is advice that anybody can use. If you're considering an organization, try to find 2 or 3 people that recently left the organization, go through LinkedIn and just reach out to them and say, hey, I'm considering this organization. I saw that you left recently. Let me, what can you tell me about it? And I've done that with many organizations that when I've gone through search processes, I've done that. I got that advice early in my career, and I've done that with almost every job I've ever taken, is try to find people who worked with that particular organization or even that particular team that I was going to be working for and say, hey, what's the organization like? What are things that I can consider? What are things that I can watch out for?
Yeah, and also that's terrific advice. And also, if you have access to former professors, career centers, because maybe you don't know somebody, but your professor or career center or alumni networks will know someone. So obviously it's better if you have a connection, but that's
Absolutely.
great advice. So a question from Jesse, who's Lebanese, new to the US. So I guess I'll broaden this out a little bit. So one is, any advice for people who are new to a geographic area, whether like you're recruiting for the US, so someone who, we see this a lot. Someone's got 10 to 15 years experience, high level in their country or region, and then they move to the US, and it's hard to break in terms of networks and access. So any general advice for people who are moving to the US and, and don't have the same professional networks, and how to go about doing that? And then after that, I'll ask a question on remote work.
So, for somebody who say they've recently moved to the US and they're trying to connect with different connect with different roles and opportunities. First off, there's a ton of fantastic organizations out there that actually help with this. And so one that I will give a shout out to is one I volunteered with called Upwardly Global. Fantastic organization. They help recent immigrants and refugees coming to the US with getting roles and getting connected to great job opportunities. There's a number of other great organizations that do similar work. I think the second is that word that no one likes to hear, which is networking. But one way that I will urge your audience to think about networking is try to find people that are like you, but 2 to 3 years ahead of you. I got this advice when I was coming out of grad school that, I was like, oh, I'm going to reach out to the top person in an organization. I'm going to reach out to this very senior person. And this person gave me the advice, was like, no, they're not going to have the experience that you have. They're not going to have the perspective that you have. Find somebody that is 2 to 3 years more experienced than you, because they're going to really understand your perspective. They're going to understand where you are in your career. And, and more importantly, they're going to have actionable advice because they have just gone through that process. They've just gone through the search, or they just joined that organization, and they'll be able to give you specific advice. And when I give people advice on networking, I say, never ask for a job right away. People will tell you if there's a job available. Never ask for a job. You think about networking and you just say, hey, like, here's my situation. What are some things that I can keep in mind? What are some options that I'm not considering? Because I think, there's a lot of things out there where people think that there's a particular box of options, but there's actually tons of opportunities available around that they just they aren't aware of. And for me, that's a personal lesson, because I wasn't aware of executive recruiting for the longest time until somebody told me about it. And so that's one, is always reach out to people, ask them about what things they're not considering. Ask them about, hey, you work for this organization and I would love to work there. But if there's opportunities that aren't there, what are other organizations that I can consider? Because not just when you're thinking about gathering information, you're not just looking at professional options, but you're looking at organizations. And I always tell people, it's like, for every one organization that you might have heard of in a particular space, for every, like, say, if you're in tech, if there's a Google or a Facebook, there are hundreds of organizations that are lesser known, but are fantastic, all have great cultures, all have great opportunities, and quite frankly, are going to be hiring at higher rates, and they're going to be easier for you to get into than a Google or a Facebook, because everybody applies to a Google or a Facebook. And this happened to me where I was in my career in management consulting, and I did actually look at joining Booz Allen earlier than I did, but it's a very well-known company, has a lot of people applying. And then my second job was actually for a 100-person management consulting firm, but they were fantastic because it was only 100 people, but they gave me opportunities for growth that I wouldn't have gotten at a larger organization. They gave, there was very flat institution, and they were just like, all right, well, we need to flex as we need to, given that we're a small, nimble organization. And they had a fantastic culture. And I didn't hear about them until a friend of mine clued me into them. So I would highly recommend use networking to find new career options that you're not considering, and find different organizations that you might not have heard of, because there are so many great organizations out there that I work with and that are in the community that many people haven't heard of, but are fantastic pathways for your career.
Wonderful advice. Thank you so much, and appreciate the question. And just two additional thoughts. So the first one is, what I like to try to help people think about is, like, where is the area of impact where their skills fit the market, mm-hmm. and this is my experience, like, and a lot of people say, I'll never work private sector, or I'll never work nonprofit. And to me, there's good and bad everywhere. And that, because I've worked for lots of nonprofits and consulted for government and, social enterprise, like, to me, it's more like, what is the change where your skills fit? And don't mm-hmm. just focus on one organization or role, because often, as you said, you can find, maybe you want to work on youth and economic development. Mm-hmm. So you could do that with Save the Children, UNDP, but also there's lots of social enterprises, there's foundation, there's venture philanthropy, so really think there's consulting firms. So really, and then decide what's the right fit. Like, maybe I don't think I would ever work for an extractive oil company. I do know lots of people who do. So, like, decide your boundaries. Mm-hmm. And then the second thing, if people haven't read the work by Adam Grant, Give and Take, a friend gave that to me. And it's like basically like everything you need to know in kindergarten. So LinkedIn, if you approach it, and we're friends with Bob Spur, the recruiter, the head of recruitment for Ashoka, who came from LinkedIn for Good. So he's taught me a lot as well. And basically, if you use LinkedIn out of curiosity and purpose, and just be like, there's amazing people all over the world doing interesting work, even if it's not in your sector, and just start, connect, learn, and share, and don't ask anybody for anything. And then, like, if you and I have been connected for 6 months, and it's not like a strategic, you keep a spreadsheet saying, oh, I communicated with Dan twice or commented, but it's like you start to sense an alignment. Then it's better to say, could I have 15 minutes of your time? But if I connected with Dan and said, tomorrow, can I have 20 minutes of your time? I mean, if we were at Tufts together or Columbia, or had really good friends in common, but it's that authentic relationship building mm-hmm. out of curiosity. If you put that first for the long term, even if you need a job, and then kind of getting the job second, it's such a different experience and so less transactional. So
Absolutely.
there's a very specific question here from Mohammed. So I'm not sure you're going to have insights, but I'm going to try to broaden it out. He's based in Pakistan, social entrepreneur, but said the market is really tanking there. So do you have any thoughts? I mean, he's asking about remote virtual assistant, but a few people have asked, like, any thought, like, for if someone's based in the rest of the world, or let's say Pakistan, and someone else was asking about South Africa, a similar question. What is your advice for someone who, let's say, is junior mid-level and they've got some really good communication skills or project management, and they're trying to start looking at remote jobs outside of their own country? Any thoughts or recommendations? Thanks for the question, Mohammed.
No, that's a very good question, and it's a tough one to answer. This is where I would love to get in touch with Mohammed and really just understand where he wants to go in his career and what he's trying to grow in. What are those find those opportunities that are a match. And I think, if you don't mind, I'll just pivot a little bit to this question of localization, which is something that we deal with a lot with clients. It's one of the biggest topics that we're dealing with. And, what I will say to your audience is that there are a number of opportunities these days in the nonprofit, international development sectors, to be growing in your home countries, in local. When I started executive search work 8 years ago, the number of roles that were being, either they wanted the person to be based in the global South or they were remote flexible. And this is at an executive level, to be based in the global South, maybe 5%, 10%. Now it's 50% and higher. And that flows down from the executive levels into different opportunities. I think organizations just in the last 5 years, even before COVID, but I think COVID definitely accelerated it, want to hire in the global South. They want to hire from all these different countries. They want to be building up staff in these places. And so, so I guess this is just, a point to Mohammed and others, is that, don't be, certainly look at opportunities to be coming to other countries and moving, but also, look at remote opportunities, look at opportunities to work with your local organizations, to really grow those skill sets and connect with a lot of the great work that's happening on the ground. And this is just getting to, what I was saying earlier, is that try to see, ask around and say, what's happening with local organizations? Where are global organizations looking to expand in my country or in my region? And where can I get involved? Because the opportunities that are in different countries these days is phenomenal, and is just a night and day difference from 5-7 years ago.
Thank you so much. And so a follow-up question, does SRI keep data, in terms of, because you're helping to recruit across many roles and organizations and geographic areas. So when you talk about, there's potentially 50% or whatever the roles that might be remote or hybrid, I've been looking a lot. I haven't seen any good data. The impact sector can mean lots of things. It can be development, innovative finance, but is there any good data out there that says, 10 years ago, like the data you're citing, is that more from your experience, SRI? And can you see any metadata saying that really there is a trend, and that, now, or at least the clients coming to you now, do you have a conversation with all of them saying, at least think about hybrid or remote, or how, do you see data or trends, or it's more impressionist? I get the same sense that there is an increase in remote roles and hybrid. And there are more organizations that say we actually prefer someone from the rest of the world or based in certain regions rather than sending someone from North America or Europe. But it's still the minority where I see that. And so I'm just curious, when clients come to you, do they already say, like, oh, we only want to hire in California, or we're open to the world? And then, any data or any favorite sources on that?
Yeah. So, what I just mentioned was probably just from my own observations and seeing that. And I keep my own statistics about the searches and work I've done over the years. And I've certainly just seen that trend over time. I think what we saw with, and I have to find the source for this, is that if you're hiring at different levels and you're keeping remote flexibility built in to say, okay, maybe we want somebody in this region, but we'd be open to remote work, or people coming, say, if you're in the Washington, D.C. area, you can be in a 2-hour kind of commuting distance. You don't have to come in every day. The interest triples. And I'll find the source for that, but it is, and I've certainly seen that just in my own work, is that when organizations open up roles to be remote flexible, or people coming from all over, they just get a huge interest in talent, a huge increase in talent interest. But more importantly, they get access to people that wouldn't normally consider the role. And it always makes for a better opportunity. And it's a huge change that organizations are, when they're thinking about remote work. And many organizations used to be, you have to come to the office 5 days a week, but now, I mean, organizations are realizing that they can really adjust their work to have people, their teams work from anywhere, their leaders be anywhere. And so that's just unlocking huge amounts of talent for organizations that wasn't there before.
And you and I were chatting prior to starting. You're coming to Medellin, so can you also talk about SRI executives' work culture in terms of can people work from anywhere, or and then when you're hiring for team members, let's say for North America or Germany, or is remote first the norm, or it depends on the role?
Yeah, so SRI, I mean, we're a globally distributed organization. We were founded in Dublin, Ireland, and our founders are based there. We have, a small office with probably about 20-25% of our staff based in Dublin, but the rest are, I mean, based all over the world. And we have folks in different countries, but everybody is remote flexible, because for our work, I mean, our clients are globally located, our candidates are globally located. And then, so there's no need for us to be based in particular areas. I mean, I'm based in Washington, D.C. because I love this city and I want to be based here. And it just so happens that a lot of my clients are based here as well. But I mean, I work with clients all over the world, not just in Washington, D.C., and same with the rest of SRI. And then you get to an important point, and I can talk about this at large, for people that are considering recruiting and or executive search, or and want to get into this work. And we think about what we look for with SRI. I mean, I think the first is a passion for the particular sector that you want to work in recruiting. Whether that's international development or a particular subsector. So say you want to do clean energy recruiting, you want to be very passionate about that space. You want to really dive into it, because you learn so much from working with your clients and talking with these candidates about this sector. So you want to be passionate, you want to be knowledgeable. When I started executive recruiting, I was coming from consulting, and so I was doing a lot of search work in consulting. I did not like it at all. I was not a fan of consulting executive search work, and so I, was moved more and more into the nonprofit side. The second is, what we term cross-cultural communication. I mean, this is a very important skill set for a lot of people, and it's important for SRI. I mean, we are in 20 countries, and we have people who, I mean, one of my colleagues, she's based in Mexico, but she is of South Asian descent. She was living in South Asia for a while, and then her and her husband moved to Mexico, and they're living there. And so she is, a great example of talent that we look for, because it's people that are living, from one culture, working or living in a second, and then communicating with people all over the world. And I think in our work, in our sector, in international development and social impact, you have to be able to work with people, collaborate with people that are coming from all different backgrounds. And so being knowledgeable of those nuances, being able to collaborate and communicate effectively with people coming from different backgrounds is incredibly important. And then the third is project management and attention to detail. I mean, I think I mentioned at the start of this that executive recruiting is very time intensive. It's very detail intensive. I mean, we're dealing with hundreds of candidates for a particular search. We're dealing with a lot of information on them, a lot of information from the client about what they're looking for. And so being able to keep all of that straight. I mean, we do a lot of discussion within SRI about productivity and professional development around productivity and knowledge management, because it's such a important thing for us. And so, so for people to come into recruiting and to executive search, you need to have that attention to detail, that project management, because you're dealing with a lot of information. And then at the same time, you're on a deadline for your clients. And so you have to very much keep to that deadline and be able to manage all the different steps of the search process along the way.
So a bunch more questions came in. Just one quick follow-up question. If you think about the tech stack or the tools that you use at SRI, I mean, I don't want to know anything confidential, but for people working in globally distributed teams, are there any either tools or areas you would say like everyone should know, a customer relationship management system or Slack, or like anything going beyond just the norm of tech tools you would encourage people to explore fluency in?
I mean, we use a pretty basic set of tools. I mean, we run everything through Microsoft Teams for our team meetings, for our chats between teams, and for share. And then we use OneDrive and SharePoint for sharing documents. We do, a lot of, since we're globally distributed, there's a lot of live editing of documents that happens with our team asynchronously. And so if, for my team that's based in Asia, if they're working on a document, then I can pick it up when I wake up in the morning. And then, we do use a CRM called Invenius that is specifically built for recruiters. And so that's a great tool. I think, and I talk about this, with my clients and elsewhere, is that the tools are not as important as the process and are not as important as the habits. I mean, I talk with people that deal with CRMs, and everybody always has the same question, same issue, no matter where they work in, is that the data is always is not always up to date, because it's, people have to really spend the time to make sure that their data that they're putting into the CRM is accurate, it's timely, and then it's properly shared with the team.
Thanks. Just one tip. We have a small CRM we use at PCDN. I actually also use it for kind of personal. I mean, not like my friends, but it's like over time. And LinkedIn isn't great for this. We have LinkedIn sales, but just a thought: if you're going to be building your network, there's lots of free CRMs you can use. I'm not going to say any tool, because you might not remember 5 years ago you had a conversation, and a good CRM, you can just keep the basics, and spreadsheets are not always the best. So here's a question from Natalia. She did her master's in international development and has found it hard to get into an entry-level job without prior experience. The catch-22. It seems like you need to volunteer intern to get into the sector. What are your opinions on this? So the catch-22 of a lot of employers, want you to have experience, but they don't often provide the pathways to have the experience they require to get the job.
Oh, it's an important question, and it's an incredibly difficult one, because it is this paradox where organizations want people to come with experience. I think for folks that are in the job search and while they're looking for work, maybe they're coming out of school, either undergrad or graduate, I encourage them to look at different volunteer opportunities, look at different in a way, gig type work. There's a lot of organizations these days that are really looking for help from contract and gig employees to help them with different projects. I also encourage them to, start looking at different personal kind of development projects, writing, language instruction. I think there's, in this sector particularly, anything you can do on building your knowledge base through writing, through research, and through language, through travel. I mean, all of that is all incredibly important for understanding this sector, understanding where you're personally aligned, professionally aligned. So take that, certainly take that time. And I think it's a difficult question. And again, I would love to, hear about her story and hear where she's looking to move into. And so, of course, encourage folks to reach out, and I'm happy to provide some advice as needed.
Thank you so much. Just two tips. One is there are lots of professional fellowships. So, I mean, I want Dan to explain a little bit what Atlas Core is since you're on the board. But like fellowships can be an amazing way to build expertise, whether it's a 2-month fellowship or 1 year, and not enough people think about that. And then two, one of my pieces of advice. A lot of people come to me and say, I want to do it, transition or build a career in this, and they start doing informational interviews or start learning. I'm like, if you become a curator, and not for yourself, but for others, like if there's a question that lots of other people are struggling with, and if you approach people, I'm a huge fan of podcasts, but it could be like video interviews or short blogs, but something where you're not just like, if I came to Dan and said, I want to have a career in executive search, and he was kind to give me 20 minutes, like that's only for me. But let's say I'm really passionate about this sector and I talk to 100 people like Dan around the world. That's a great thing. Think about short podcasts or a way to aggregate that data. So you become like the curator, not in an egotistical sense, because you're sharing what you're learning with others. And that's one of the best ways to grow. And then again, there's board service, there's UN volunteers, there's Peace Corps, there's Africa Corps. So there are a lot of these kind of short-term things between 1 or 2 years. Like if you're having a really hard time, it could be your materials, it could be the market, it could be mismatch in skills, but there are other pathways. So the next question comes from Joy, and this is a really good one. How do you select or vet your talents, ensuring they're a good fit for the role? And have you ever had wrong pairing? And she's asking from a client perspective. And how do you adapt, as a executive recruiter firm, how do you adapt, if you're working with a foundation, like an organization has 5,000 employees versus 30?
Mm-hmm. Oh, no, this is probably the top question that we deal with as executive recruiters. So ensuring that they're a good fit for the role. One, I'll just reiterate what I said earlier about, we always encourage our clients to have transparency and to be open on both with the candidate and have the client, be open about what's going on and what are their challenges, because you want to make sure that you have, that's a big thing when it comes to that wrong pairing, if people aren't aware of what they're getting into. And I think, I want to get, to this point about, what are the things that people can think about in terms of skill development and professional development to move into those executive roles. And, I often get this question. And so there's 3 things that I think your audience can think about as they're trying, maybe they're mid-career and they want to think about moving into the executive roles, because these are the things that we always get asked by our clients to assess. So one is their strategic experience. So their ability to formulate a strategy, formulate a vision, and not just for an organization. It could be for a team, be it for a department, could be for a particular development program. If they're coming in to lead that program, they need to have a vision for where they want to take that. And so a lot of organizations, when we're doing executive search, they will have built into this process about asking the candidate about their vision, asking them about their strategy, and about how they formulate that. So, your audience really needs to think about it. It's like, how am I kind of building my skill sets when it comes to that strategic formulation, about planning, about thinking 5 years ahead, about gathering that information. So that's one. The second, of course, is team leadership. That is, of course, the big thing that separates, say, a technical expert, technical advisor from an executive, is that team people management. So think about, how can you develop your opportunities to build a team, manage a team, develop a team. And the things we're seeing, of course, these days is clients would love to hear from candidates. It's like, how are you mentoring your team? How are you helping your team with their own learning and development? So, Craig, it just gets back to your point about being that resource for people that you were just saying, is that if you're gathering information, try to be that resource for people, be that mentor for people. Even if you're only 5 years into your career and you think, oh, I'm so junior, there are people that are 2 years into their career that love to hear from you, that would love to be mentored by you. So, and even if you're 2 years into your career, there are people that are just starting their career that would love to hear from you. So always look to be that resource from people, always look to build up people. And then, as I talked about things about cross-cultural communication, and that really gets into leadership. How are you managing, building a team that is coming from different cultures, different backgrounds, different sectors, and it's a very important skill, and it's one that our clients always love to hear about. And then the last one, I'm sure not many people like to hear, but it comes to funding and money and fundraising, sales, business development. I mean, if you're coming into the leadership of an organization, you have to be able to manage the budget of the program or the department of the organization, gather additional funding, be reaching out to people, learn how to write grants. A lot of people think that that's kind of the dirty part. They don't like it, but it's so critical. And it's so important, even in the nonprofit sector, because you have to be able to sell your vision, sell your organization, sell your department to a funder, sell it to donors. And it's such a important part that people really need to understand. And they don't have to be experts in it, because there are people that go that track. But you need to at least understand it. And, people probably are wondering about the technical expertise, and it's like, that's incredibly important. But that's not what's going to differentiate you as getting into the executive levels. And I'm about to start a search actually with a global health organization. And they actually said that the technical expertise for their particular area is actually at the lowest part, because they want that strategist, they want that manager first and foremost. And then the technical side, they have technical leaders in their organization that can help that executive.
Is it okay if we go to about 11:05?
Sure.
Is that okay? Okay? Yeah. So a couple more questions have come in, and then so bring in one or two more, and then start to wrap up. Just going back to Joy's question: is there data from SRI or others where if a organization recruits for a senior role on their own versus goes through an executive search firm, that let's say I took wasn't super senior, pretty senior job years ago in another country. I won't say where. They sponsored my visa. I moved. I quit after 3 months. I won't go and they liked my work. It just wasn't, and I think it was more me than them, but it wasn't a great fit, And so is there any data to show if an executive recruitment firm helps that the placement, both the happiness on both sides and the retention in terms of, for a number of years, that it tends to be better? And then a related question: if someone's listening to this now or in the future and they're thinking about, do they recruit in-house or through an executive firm, any general tips? And then how do they vet, because SRI is terrific. How do they vet you and others? Like how does someone decide when to use an executive firm and how to select the right firm?
Mm-hmm. So for that, let me answer that second question first, which is, how do organizations select an executive search firm? I mean, they of course look at the track record. Does this firm have experience in the areas that they're recruiting for? Do they have prior experience doing similar roles, or do they really know the organization? Where the organization is trying to go. I think of course cost is going to be a consideration especially for nonprofits that can be cost constrained. And I think it's certainly one thing that we try to support in our work with a lot of our clients. And then it comes down to the process and what they're looking for, and what are some of the differentiators in our process compared to our competitors. And I think, we've been in business for 25 years and have a fantastic process that a lot of our clients, and particularly a lot of our candidates, like. And then, getting to your point of your other question about what happens if things don't work out and if we have data, I unfortunately, I don't think there would, we call these failed searches, and, and there's a lot of times where a client will have tried to do the search themselves, use their in-house recruiters or just reach out through their own networks, but then they just can't find the talent. And so then they'll turn to us. We don't have the data. I think a lot of people wouldn't be happy sharing that, because it admits a failure. But it does happen. I mean, anecdotally, I would say probably 1 out of 3 searches that I've worked on have been a situation like that, where a client tried to do a search themselves. It didn't work out, so they come to us. But I think something about our process is that we like to put our money in a way where our mouth is. And so we have a guarantee that's built into all of our contracts that say, if we help you hire somebody and they don't work out, they leave in less than a year, we will do that search again for free. And we will help you find a better person. And in my time at SRI, I have not had to do that. I mean, we have not had to use that stipulation because everybody has been a great fit for the work and a great fit for the organization. And so I think, and I think it gets to some of the things I've talked about earlier about transparency. It's about risk reduction and about making sure that things are the right fit for the client, but also just getting back. I mean, I always want my candidates to be excited and I want them to be a good fit. I want them to be incredibly passionate about this work. And I've had plenty of conversations with candidates that are getting into the final stages. Maybe they're a top 3 candidate in the process. And they're like, I'm having doubts about this. And I'm like, listen to those doubts. I don't want you to come into a role that you're not excited about. I want you to come into something that you can't wait for and that you just want to dive in. And if this isn't the right fit for you, and that could be various reasons, then wait for something better and we'll help you with that.
I'll bring in one more question and then we'll start to wrap up. Sorry I didn't get to everybody's. So Ekaterina is asking, she's got education, she's doing consulting work, but she's trying to get a full-time job and it's been challenging. And someone else who's from Afghanistan, I forgot your name, I apologize, who lives in the UK said something similar, like they've been applying and they have lots of expertise. They're not getting interviews or results. So I guess there's 2 questions there. So one is when someone applies, and it's different at the executive search level, but when someone applies for a job and they don't hear back, I mean, I talk to a lot of employers, they're getting 300 to 500 applications. Like sometimes they just don't have the time, but any advice, like when you're applying and you don't hear back, what's the, I have a ratio in my mind. I say like, if you applied for 50, depends on your level and expertise, but I have a ratio. I can be like, well, this year, this number of years experience, this expertise, this sector, this education, you should be getting like 20% interview rate or 40% or 5. So any advice both for like, how do people figure out what they're doing wrong? And when they don't hear back from an employer, like, should they just give up? Should they go on? Like, because a lot of times it's frustrating for the candidates.
Yeah. And no, so I'll answer that second question first, which is, and this is something that I do in all my work. And I talk to my clients about this, is that especially at the executive level, but this is true for all levels, you need to be communicating to your candidates, even if they don't move forward. And I always if I talk to a candidate in any way, shape, or form, and then they don't end up moving forward in different stages of the process, I always go back to them. I always try to give some feedback. Sometimes I can't. Sometimes, a client is just, they're not the right fit, or they don't have the particular experience that the client is looking for. But especially, I think anytime I have a candidate then go and meet a client or, do a virtual interview with them, I always ask the client to say, hey, give me some feedback that I can give back to that candidate for why they move forward, because they invested time in this. I will say is that for people that are applying and just sending in their application to, a job board or an ATS or a particular role, it is very unlikely for what you mentioned, Craig, that if organizations are getting 500 applications, they're not going to be replying. And it's an unfortunate side. And I think, my firm, we have open applications for a lot of our roles and we can't get back to everybody. But then just to narrow down into I think a particular actionable piece of advice for your audience is, and from working with people at various levels, I think a lot of people have a almost call it a spray and pray approach, where they just blast their application out to 50 jobs and then they don't hear back. And I always go to them and saying, well, which of those were you actually excited for and a fit for? Like, did you just find something? And it takes a lot more time. But what I always try to recommend people do is that, people have a very general application, just a very general CV and resume. And this is even people at the executive levels. And I always say to people, it's like, well, did you answer what the job actually asked for? Did you say, if it's looking for project management experience, for example, like, did you make your application, your CV really focused on that project management experience? I tell people is that your resume is a selling document, and it's not your entire job experience from start to finish. It is selected highlights of your job experience. Even if you're relatively junior in your experience, there's still a lot that you've done and a lot that you can highlight from your prior experience and to sell in your next role. And so, try to be very specific. And, when I was job searching before, I had 3 or 4 different versions of my CV, and each of those was very tailored to particular roles. One of them, I think my base resume was about 6 pages long. And because it had all these different bullets from my job experience that were framed in different ways. And then when I sent it in, I would filter out all the different bullets that didn't matter to that job. And I would just put in the most important ones for that particular role. So be specific. If you do that, individualization of your CV to apply, you're going to get a better return. It's going to take more time, but you're going to get a better return. Because I can't tell you how many times at an executive level, I'll be interviewed, and this is a top executive, somebody who's incredibly experienced applying for a role. I'm doing an early interview with them. And I'm like, oh, well, what's what else from your experience that is relevant? And they'll tell me about a particular experience. And I'm like, that's amazing. That's super relevant for this role. This is one of the first things the role asked about. Why isn't that in your CV? And they're like, oh, well, my CV is very broad. It's very high. I was like, no, you really should have taken the time. Because a lot of times that person might get filtered out. I might look at their CV and not see the relevant experience for this and say, okay, they're not a fit. They left out that particular experience. So be very specific about your experience, and especially something that I will always urge people when they're looking at their CVs is include data and include details. I can't, even at an executive level, so many CVs can be so vague about like, well, I helped an organization improve its fundraising. It's like, that doesn't tell me much. I was like, how much did you improve the fundraising? By what level did you start with? And then what level did you end with? What specifically did you contribute? I think people sometimes are very wary of being too boastful or saying, oh, well, this is part of a team. Well, yeah, but you need to be selling yourself. You need to be putting in what specifically you did. It's always like, I did this that led to this change. That's how every bullet in your CV should be listed out. Like, you want to be specific. You want to, of course, call out that there was other people working on a particular project or in a particular initiative, but what specifically what specific change did you bring? And if you start to put that into your experience, like, I can't tell you how many CVs that I read that people don't even put in the number of people they managed. And I was like, that's incredibly important. Why did you leave out how big your teams are? So I'll just leave that for your audience.
I'm going to take this little excerpt because I think that's so critical. And, we work with hundreds of clients on the other end. And, what I say to people is the same thing, like, you have to tell a compelling story in data and narrative that shows why you are destined for this opportunity without being egotistical. And that these documents are not about you. Because I've seen thousands of resumes and like, they're generic and they might be great, but they don't say why this person for this role at this organization. So it's also making that connection, because they might say, I want to work in international health. Great. But why this role at the Gates Foundation? Yeah. And so that is such brilliant advice. And so many people don't do that adequately. And if someone asks me to recommend them for a job and the materials are bad, I don't want to pass that along, because it's also, if you're asking others in your network to help, make sure your materials are amazing. So go to your University Career Center. We do a lot in PCDN in our career campus and courses, 80,000 hours, LinkedIn. There's so many resources now that you can find to help, or get a friend to review it. 80,000 hours. We have a bunch of stuff for free. We charge for some things. 80,000 hours does some free career coaching you could apply for. But make sure your materials are good. So to wrap up quickly, 3 quick questions, and I promise they're quick. One is, what do you see as the trends that are growing in social impact in terms of sectoral expertise where there's more need for talent? Second thing is, what are you doing for fun and learning right now? It could be professional or not. And and then 3, any books or movies you've seen that might have nothing to do with professional, but you just are making your brain think in a good way.
Great question. So the first one, like, what trends am I seeing? I mean, I think the big one I talked about was localization. I mean, that's a huge area. So for people, getting that on the ground knowledge and on the ground experience is critical. I think a few areas that we're seeing higher interest in from our clients at the executive level is in MEL. I think that's been a big, there's been a lot of interest in MEL, in evaluation, in audit, in oversight. I think a lot of organizations are looking at how are they funding things appropriately, but making sure that that money is being properly spent. And I think so that's a trend. That's certainly a recent trend that we've seen. What am I doing for fun? So I am actually working on a second book right now. I am doing a larger, career guidebook. And it's going to be looking at some of the fundamental kind of psychological underpinnings of the job search. And so really, instead of helping, I gave some advice just now about resumes, but I wanted to start digging into why was the resume created? Why is it such an important document? Why do people only review it for 7 seconds, for example? And so that's been a fascinating thing. And I think the most recent movie that had an impact on me was Oppenheimer. But actually, and this is tying back to my undergrad in history, that the book that Oppenheimer was based off of was actually written by my history advisor at Tufts. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago, so he did not get to see. He was the co-author. He did not get to see the movie. This was Mark Sherwin. Did not get to see the movie come to life, but I actually did my senior thesis in college on Oppenheimer and on the topics that the movie and the book were based off of. So it was a very, very impactful movie for me.
Wow. And my brother's lived in New Mexico for 30 years. I mean, not in Los Alamos, but obviously has a lot of meaning and impact for people who are both affected negatively by all the testing and also the whole industry of, Los Alamos. It's so thank you so much for your time and for sharing your wisdom and energy and being open to providing a copy of your previous book, so people can follow or contact you. So thank you everyone for watching around the world and for all your questions and energy, and apologies that we didn't get to all of them. Please do follow Dan on LinkedIn, follow SRI, follow PCDN. Lots of people are saying thank you. You can watch this now on LinkedIn or YouTube immediately. And then by next Friday, this will be up as one of our podcasts. And again, just to go back to where we started, please, if you like this, or even if you hate it, please think about sharing and rating it, because it just helps grow our reach. And we've got an amazing 11th season coming up. And there's 10 other seasons, from people from innovative finance to social impact recruiting to reducing gender-based violence, from I think 30 countries. And thank you so much, Dan. Have a wonderful morning and appreciate you taking the time. And thank you everyone for participating.
Thank you so much, Craig. I appreciate you and putting together this podcast and everything you're doing for the community. And thank you so much for the audience for listening in.
Okay.